Picture this. You're strolling through the streets of 19th century London. The fog is thick, but the smell, thicker. A nauseating cocktail of sweat, sewage, rotting food, dead animals, and industrial waste hits your nostrils like a punch. But this wasn't a rare occasion. In the Victorian era, this was daily life, and everyone reeked. Not just the poor or the homeless, everybody. But why? Why did an entire society, renowned for manners and sophistication, smell like a rotting corpse in a perfume bottle? Today, we're diving into one of history's strangest contradictions, how a period obsessed with elegance, etiquette, and image became one of the filthiest, foulest-smelling chapters in world history. From mysterious events like the Great Stink to horrifying medical myths that warned people bathing could kill them, the Victorians were navigating life through a haze of stench, superstition, and sewage. And trust me, some of the things they did to stay clean are far worse than simply staying dirty. We'll explore the bizarre history of corsets soaked in sweat, arsenic-laced beauty creams, public urinals built into alley walls, and how a single river turned an empire into a giant petri dish of disease. You'll hear fun history facts and historical curiosities that sound more like urban legends, but they're real. This isn't just about bad hygiene, it's about fear, class control, outdated science, and a society caught between superstition and the birth of modern medicine. So if you're into history facts, lesser-known history, or famous mysteries that don't smell quite right, stick around. Hit that subscribe button and comment below. What's the grossest historical fact you've ever heard? Because by the time we reach the Great Stink, you'll never look at soap, perfume, or history the same way again. To understand why the Victorian era was a symphony of stench, we need to look at the world they lived in. A rapidly growing urban jungle, bursting at the seams with people, industry, and filth. By the mid-1800s, cities like London had become bloated behemoths of humanity. The Industrial Revolution brought millions from rural areas into overcrowded urban slums, but infrastructure couldn't keep up. There were no sewage systems, no public sanitation, and definitely no working plumbing in most homes. Waste was dumped in the streets, thrown into rivers, or stored in cesspools beneath floorboards. The result? Entire neighborhoods built atop their own rot. The Thames River, often glorified in poetry, had essentially become a giant open sewer. It wasn't unusual for people to see dead animals floating alongside human excrement. The stench was so powerful that in the summer of 1858, Parliament had to suspend meetings because of what became known as the Great Stinker, history event that still reeks in the annals of world history. But the issue wasn't just filth, it was fear. The dominant medical theory of the time was miasma, the belief that diseases like cholera and typhoid were spread through foul-smelling air, not germs. Ironically, people avoided cleaning their environments or themselves out of fear that disrupting the bad air could make things worse. In a twist of history trivia, they actually believed that washing opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body. Add to this the fact that soap was expensive, water was rarely clean, and bathrooms were a luxury of the elite. Most people bathed maybe once a month, if that, and even then, the water was often reused by entire households. Public health reformers were just beginning to understand germ theory, but they were fighting centuries of deeply entrenched superstition and class inequality. Wealthy could hide their smells behind perfumes and powdered wigs, but the poor had no such option. Smell became a symbol of social status. Victorian England wasn't just dirty, it was terrified of getting clean. And this fear was rooted in a toxic mix of pseudoscience, desperation, and deeply flawed logic. If you're fascinated by how ancient civilizations and forgotten history shaped our hygiene, or lack thereof, don't forget to hit that like button and comment below. Would you have survived a week in Victorian London? If Victorian society had a scent, it would be a disturbing blend of sweat, talcum powder, animal fat, and something vaguely medicinal. The truth is, even if the cities had been cleaned, they weren't. Victorian fashion was a trap for the human body. Let's start with clothing. Most people wore the same garments for days, even weeks, at a time. Washing clothes was labor-intensive, expensive, and rarely done thoroughly. Underwear, if worn, wasn't changed daily, and it was typically made of heavy fabrics that trapped moisture and bacteria. Corsets worn tightly for hours every day, soaked up sweat and body odor, and rarely got cleaned. By the end of the day, the smell of tightly bound flesh beneath wool and lace could be suffocating, especially in crowded, overheated indoor spaces. That then came the cosmetics. Victorians loved pale, smooth skin, but their makeup often contained deadly ingredients like lead, arsenic, and mercury. Women smeared white paste over unwashed skin, sealing in dirt and bacteria. Rouge was sometimes made from crushed insects or toxic chemicals. Fragrance wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. People doused themselves in colognes and floral waters to mask the odor of unwashed bodies, but the result was less elegant and more overripe. And let's not forget, hair wigs were reused, sometimes shared, and often never washed. Natural hair was cleaned infrequently with vinegar, eggs, or even brandy, leaving behind a unique cocktail of smells. Lice were common. Head coverings like bonnets and hats only helped trap the heat in the scent. Hair tonics and oils made from bear fat or other animal byproducts added their own rancid notes to the already rich bouquet. In public spaces, houses, carriages, ballrooms, the air was thick with the collective perfume of decay, sweat, and overcompensation. The higher the social class, the more layers you wore, meaning the more you stank beneath the surface. All of this paints a picture of a time when history's secrets were hidden beneath lace and powder, when looking good was prioritized far above smelling good or being healthy. Hygiene was more about illusion than reality. If you're enjoying these lesser-known history facts and bizarre history discoveries, hit that subscribe button and tell us which part of Victorian fashion would have driven you insane. We're just getting started. Next, we look at why taking a bath could have been a death sentence. To modern minds, the idea of fearing a bath sounds absurd, but in Victorian times, bathing wasn't just rare, it was considered dangerous, and not just by the uneducated. Doctors, midwives, clergy, and even the wealthy elite all believed water could kill you. At the heart of this fear was the miasma theory, the belief that bad smells carried disease. Opening your pores with hot water, many thought, made you more vulnerable to these deadly vapors. For that reason, the act of washing, especially with warm water, was viewed with suspicion. Instead, people relied on dry baths, rubbing themselves with cloths soaked in vinegar, rosewater, or even alcohol. The goal wasn't cleanliness, it was neutralizing odor without compromising health. In some circles, frequent bathing was associated with moral corruption or laziness. There was a twisted pride in being naturally resilient. People believed their own body odors helped build immunity. Others thought water weakened the body or shocked the system, especially for women and children. This wasn't just folk belief, it was promoted in medical literature, religious tracts, and educational guides of the time. Public bathhouses did exist, but they were often segregated by class and gender, and considered a last resort. For many, especially the poor, bathing involved hauling cold water from a pump, heating it over a fire, and filling a tin basin. Entire families would share the same bathwater, often starting with the father and ending with the baby. By the end, the water was more stew than soap. Even royalty wasn't immune to this fear. Queen Elizabeth I was said to bathe once a month, whether she needed it or not, a sentiment echoed by the upper class. Instead of soap, people used powders, pomanders, and heavy perfumes to mask odors. Skin creams made with pig fat or whale oil were popular among the elite, trapping sweat beneath a fragrant sheen. This deeply ingrained phobia of cleanliness wasn't just strange, it was lethal. Avoiding water allowed bacteria to flourish, spreading diseases like typhus and cholera across entire communities. Ironically, the very thing they feared was the thing that could have saved them. If you love strange history, fun history facts, and unsolved mysteries about how we used to live, make sure to subscribe, and let us know how long could you go without a bath in 1850. By the summer of 1858, the city of London had become a living nightmare. The Thames, once a source of pride and poetry, had turned into a putrid, pulsating artery of rot. The heatwave that year didn't help. It baked the waste, accelerated decay, and released a stench so foul that people fled the riverside in horror. This wasn't just unpleasant, it was paralyzing. The city came to a literal standstill. Even Parliament was forced to halt proceedings. Curtains soaked in lime chloride were hung at the windows in a futile attempt to block the air. The newspapers dubbed it the Great Stink, a phrase that now marks one of the most grotesque historical events in British history. But how did it get this bad? The answer lies in a deadly cocktail of industrialization, overpopulation, and London's population had exploded from under 1 million in 1800 to over 3 million by mid-century. Yet the infrastructure hadn't changed. Human and industrial waste was dumped directly into the Thames, the same river used for drinking water. Add thousands of slaughterhouses, tanneries, chemical plants, and leaking cesspools into the mix, and you had a sewer system disguised as a capital city. The miasma theory only made things worse. Authorities focused on neutralizing smells instead of cleaning water. Streets were sprayed with perfume. Lime was tossed into gutters. Windows were sealed shut. Public health policy was built on illusions, while cholera ravaged neighborhoods with surgical precision, often starting in the poorest districts and creeping toward the elite. The tragedy is, they had been warned. Scientists like John Snow know, not that one had already proven that water contamination, not bad air, was the source of disease. His work on a cholera outbreak linked to a contaminated pump on Broad Street was groundbreaking, but entrenched beliefs, class prejudice, and bureaucratic inertia delayed action. It took a crisis of biblical proportions, the Great Stink to force change. That summer, Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli described the Thames as a Stygian pool, reeking with ineffable and intolerable horrors. That wasn't metaphor. The river had become the underworld, dark, swollen with decay, and teeming with unseen killers. Finally, Parliament commissioned engineer Joseph Bazalgette to design a new underground sewer system, a massive, visionary project that would become one of the greatest engineering feats in world history. Using over 80 miles of underground pipes, Bazalgette redirected London's waste far from the city centre. His system, still in use today, saved thousands of lives and marked the beginning of modern sanitation. But it came at a cost: a generation of suffering, millions of lives lost, and a city suffocating in its own waste before anyone listened. If you love forgotten history, history discoveries, or the strange turning points that shaped our world, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Would you have survived the smell or joined the exodus? Victorian life wasn't just fowls. Melling Yit was filled with daily customs so revolting, they'd be hard to believe if not documented in countless historical stories and records. These weren't fringe practices either. They were widespread, accepted, and in many cases, considered normal, even noble. Let's start with chamber pots. Before indoor plumbing, people relieved themselves in ceramic pots stored under the bed. In the morning, their contents, called night soil, were dumped into the street or thrown out of windows with little warning. Yes, the classic phrase, "Gardi Loo," was your only defense against a rain of human waste. Even in upscale neighborhoods, stepping outside meant stepping carefully, at risk becoming part of the sidewalk stew. And the horrors didn't stop there. Many households lacked outhouses or toilets entirely. In cities like Manchester and Liverpool, privy middens, essentially open cesspits, were shared by dozens of families. They were rarely cleaned, overflowed in summer, and spread disease like wildfire. Add in the smell of rotting garbage, decaying animals, and untreated sewage, and it's easy to see why the air itself felt toxic. Then, there were dustmen, the original sanitation workers. They didn't just collect garbage, they also picked up ashes, animal bones, and occasionally ... bodies. With mortality rates high and bureaucracies slow, some corpses went unreported for days. The smell would alert neighbors long before any officials arrived. Now, brace yourself. Many Victorians believed bad smells could fight other bad smells, so they deliberately carried small cloth bags filled with spices, vinegar-soaked sponges, or dried flowers. These pomanders were pressed to the nose during walks through filthy streets or while visiting the sick. Some were worn on chains around the neck like jewelry. It was fashion meets desperation, a real-life weird history accessory. Meanwhile, funeral customs took morbid to the next level. It wasn't unusual to photograph the dead, prop them up in lifelike poses, and hang the images in living rooms. Hair from deceased relatives was often woven into intricate jewelry, rings, bracelets, even brooches meant to be worn every day. We often romanticize the Victorian era as all lace, carriages, and top hats, but peel back the polished veneer, and you'll find a bizarre history of filth, fear, and deeply unsettling customs. Enjoying this ride through strange historical curiosities? Smash that like button and drop a comment. Which of these disgusting facts surprised you the most? And now, for our final descent into the dark, let's reflect on what it all means, and how close we came to never smelling fresh again. It's easy to laugh at the Victorians, the corsets, the chamber pots, the rivers of sewage, but the truth is, their fear of cleanliness was rooted in a deeper reality. survival. In a world without antibiotics, clean water, or accurate science, people clung to the beliefs they had, no matter how flawed, and those beliefs shaped everything from how they dressed, to how they loved, to how they died. They weren't stupid, they were scared, and in many ways, they were trying their best with what they knew. But their stories serve as a powerful reminder. Bad science and worse policy can be just as deadly as any disease. What we call progress today was once considered radical, even dangerous. It's humbling, isn't it, to realize that famous mysteries like the Great Stink, or bizarre rituals like dry baths, weren't acts of ignorance, they were acts of survival. The fight for cleanliness was a battle that cost millions of lives. And still, many of those same lessons are being relearned in different forms even today. Today, we think of showers as routine, soap as a basic need, and clean streets as a given. But the history of hygiene is anything but clean. It's filled with bizarre customs, forgotten tragedies, and shocking turning points. It's also one of the greatest unsung victories in world history, proof that infrastructure, education, and science can literally change the way we live and breathe. So the next time you step into a hot shower, light a scented candle, or flush a toilet, remember, people once believed those simple actions could kill them, and in some cases, without proper systems, they did. So did you survive the stench? If you did, hit that subscribe button for more history facts, unsolved mysteries, and weird historical truths, and tell us in the comments which part of this journey shocked you the most. Because history doesn't just repeat, it sometimes reeks, and understanding the past means facing it even when it smells like death warmed over.